they just still existed, and it's just dead out there.
It's also
Thank
it's
you.
like the the Quaker heritage. You can't buy liquor.
Oh,
You
yeah.
can only buy liquor from state-run liquor
Yeah,
stores.
New Hampshire's like that.
So they're actually, the state of Pennsylvania is the apparently like the largest buyer of liquor in the world, right?
Right. Yeah.
It's a nice view of
Yeah, you know what I will. As a matter of fact, yeah,
it's funny
you
too,
know,
because
we
like
will.
Hollywood High School is right up the street.
I need. Let me ask you. Do you want to? There's this.
South Forest, Whitaker, Walpole, we're invited.
Oh yeah, that's cool.
Right.
Thought we'd get started if we could. If maybe the door would be shut, it would be easier. I don't know how much audio sharing we want to do. Well, this is we got a heck of a peg for this topic, as we say in the news business. For those of you who are on another planet, Viacom just sued YouTube/Google for $1 billion, give or take. You know, so maybe this is a watershed moment, maybe not. But it looks a little bit like Napster in some ways, and it's something that I think we're going to spend a lot of time talking about here. But I'm Joe Mann. I'm a writer for the LA Times. I covered technology for a long time from San Francisco. Now I'm down here covering Hollywood. And we have but the folks who, most of whom none of whom have been sued yet by major conglomerates. So that's good so far. I wanted to everyone briefly introduce themselves and their companies, and then we'll start throwing stuff around. We'll start with you, Doug.
Okay, great. I'm Douglas Warshaw. I'm one of the founders of MotionBox, and MotionBox is a personal video sharing service. My own background is I started as a producer at the network news division in the 70s, and had been hearing, I guess, for the last 10 or 15 years. I also was one of the guys who started up Classic Sports Network. I had been hearing stuff about user-generated content and just thinking, well, most of it's crap. And especially since a lot of the producers I work with who are professionals, a lot of what they produce is crap. And a couple of things happened, one of which was the social networking phenomenon, which suddenly made it possible for there to be, in a sense, crap shifters. I mean, you could sift through stuff and the community could find what was interesting to them. And so when we started MotionBox, we set out to sort of apply those technologies to user-generated content, because our belief is that the vast majority of video that is flying around the web is raw, unproduced content. And so how do you weigh that on a macro level and decide, I like this, I like this? But then the last part of what I'll say is that, again, for about 10 years I've been hearing about video on the web, and for me the biggest problem hasn't been bandwidth, it's that video is a linearly consumed medium. And the problem is that a great deal, especially of raw and produced video that you want to see, is non-narrative. It's just information. And so I don't want to have to sit through a presentation of just information. And so a lot of what we do and I urge you all to go there and check it out, at MotionBox is come up with technology that literally lets you see inside the video and just highlight pieces that you want and email them to people without having to do any editing, or to be able to select those portions that you want. And we think that, again, that's key in a world where people are sharing not just pirated material, but video that they are shooting and yet don't want to actually, or doesn't deserve to have produced a presentation of. And so that's basically where our focus is.
Thanks.
I'm Raghav, or Rags Gupta, as everybody calls me. Feel free to call me that. I'm Vice President of Consumer Services and Partnerships at Bright Cove. We are an internet television distribution service. We provide a distribution and syndication platform for content publishers and owners of all sizes, from independent production companies and mom and pop filmmakers all the way up to the largest media organizations in the world, like some MTV Properties, Discovery, Communications, Warner Music, Dow Jones, etc. We also have a number of services that we layer on top of it for folks that are looking for additional distribution options or monetization options, such as an ad network, as well as brightcove.com, and an affiliate network as well.
Good afternoon. Are we on?
You can use mine.
There we go. Got it. Good afternoon. My name is Joe Hurd, and I'm the VP of Business Development at VideoEgg. And VideoEgg is sort of a next-generation video editing, content distribution, and advertising company. We focus primarily on online communities and social networks. So if you go to, say, 10 of the top 20 social networks in the US, we power their video experience. Companies like High5, Bebo, Pixo, My Yearbook, etc. And I like to say to our primary audiences, whether they're people that create content or advertise against content or video sites, we bring you two things: friends and money. That's what we do.
Brian Gruber, founder and CEO of Fora TV. Fora is the plural of forum. What we do is we take the best public forums from around the world, started in the US, sourced Europe next, and just came back from Asia. Events, whether there's authors speaking at bookstores or university panels or public forums, World Affairs Council, etc. Anytime someone's saying something interesting, provocative, or smart in public, we get it captured and we put it in an immersive flash portal where our viewers can join the conversation. We do synchronized transcriptions that are fully searchable, so you can get exactly to the word that's uttered. And all of our programs are chaptered and fully shareable. And we've been around for about a year. My background is in the cable television business in LA and Sydney and lots of other places. And so that's what we do.
Alex Kanakaris, the chairman and founder of Wi-Fi TV. We've been around for about 12 years. We've been a small public company in the United States for about 10 years, and we'll be in the London AIM Stock Exchange over the next 6 months. We've had the phenomenal fun and opportunity of watching the development of the internet pretty much from the early stages, and especially on the topic of what we're discussing today about getting content and replicating to people all around the world that have an internet connection. In late 1995, we did the first full-length movie online. We put hundreds of movies online, and for the last year, we have literally tracked down TV stations and content providers everywhere in the world, from China to Cuba to Russia to Eastern Europe, Western Europe, Sweden, Scandinavia, Africa, and everywhere in between. And if they have a station and they would like a larger audience for it, whether it be on music, politics, religion, fashion, or whatever it might be, look, put your TV station on Wi-Fi TV, and anybody in the world with faster than a dial-up connection can not only see the station, thus possibly greatly enhancing your audience size, your own personal ad revenue, but also they can chat, and they can chat specific on that topic. And we divided up the site into countries and categories so that people of like interests can meet and congregate there. And we've done things like a Wi-Fi TV phone, which literally is free to download, free to make calls anywhere in the world, phone, PC, PC to PC. Any of our members can by entering the email address. We have something called Wi-Fi Party so that people in 25 different locations can party with each other. Today is obviously a great and historic day to be on this panel because the issue of the Viacom suit really gets to the essence of the difference between the internet, the big content providers, and how they deal with the internet.
Thanks a lot, guys. I think my first question really is for Brian. And you hear about user-generated content. Cat falling off couch, dog hits owner in crotch, and you don't think of the World Affairs Council. You don't think of the Brookings Institution. What kind of traction are you getting? I mean, is there demand for that sort of thing? And has the internet been as good for you as it's been for the cat falling off couch guys?
Well, it's in our early days now. We've been around for just short of a year with the product. We put out the second iteration of it in January. We double our traffic about every 3 weeks or so, and we're still in fundraising mode in terms of generating budgets to aggregate the content to get to where we want to be. But we have a pretty fierce belief that there is an audience out there, particularly worldwide, of intellectually curious and time-poor adults who, if they had the time and if the content was parsed out in ways in which they can consume it, downloading the audio, taking a 3-minute chapter, and getting exactly with the right filter to the content they want, then there's a very large audience for it. So we think that this new generation of interactive tools allows this kind of underserved and hungry audience an opportunity to be served, aggregating all this content in one place and providing the tools for people to participate.
There are a number of ways to go at the Viacom issue. I mean, there are a bunch of issues from the Viacom suit, but one of them is the magic word is filtering. How hard is it in all of your experiences to filter out content that doesn't belong where it's going. Either it's objectionable, it's copyrighted, it doesn't fit the theme, what have you. And you guys are playing in different areas here, but I'm curious about all of your experiences on trying to police something if you've got anything that's user-generated.
I'll start. A couple of things. Our site really is focused more on personal video, and so that we probably have less of people, throwing Viacom clips onto our site. But of course, since it's personal video, let's just say we can occasionally encounter ultra-personal video. The other thing that happens is we have done some partnerships with major media companies. For example, NBC. We're on all the NBC owned and operated stations, and so when they are asking people to please submit video, they're doing it through NBC. Couple of things where our technology allows people like NBC to literally just open up the video and look at all the frames, so that without having to look at a 30-second clip or a 30-minute clip in 30 minutes, they can quickly just say, okay, nobody's naked, nobody's on fire, the odds are pretty good we can put this up. Would it scale? I mean, if your wildest dreams come true and you've got a bajillion people uploading stuff, you still have 3 guys at NBC looking at all of them? Well, it's for NBC putting it up. Let's say NBC is getting hundreds and hundreds of videos. I mean, that's their determination on 2 levels. One is how much resources they want putting into it. I personally don't think, and maybe someone here has other opinions or other experiences, that you can rely on the technology of just technology filtering, and we've got this algorithm that knows how to look for naked bodies. I just don't think that that's, I mean, I think you need to have a human element in it. The other portion that we do, which we think is really important, is uploading a video on any of the NBC stations, so KNBC out here, for example. After I upload the video, I get a little page that says, thanks for your video. When it's approved, you can see it on KNBC, but you can see it right now in MotionBox. And what this does is this gives the end user immediate access to their stuff. It protects NBC from any objectionable content. It protects their brand, and it protects them from any rights violations as well. We don't want that on our site, but less of a problem for us than it is for NBC. So I think that you sort of come to certain accommodations, and I think part of what the Viacom suit is about is that they just don't believe that the YouTube guys really did anything to make any accommodations aside from build a business on the back of other people's property.
I think just picking up on what my colleagues said, similarly, our audience is our online communities, they're social networks. They're not necessarily major broadcasters or major content owners. That being said, though, we still obviously have to respect the rights of content owners, and we've developed technology as well that allows us to scan video and bump out the inappropriate, the porn, the obviously copyrighted material. To answer your question, there is a human element to it, and yes, as it scales up, as your traffic scales up, you have to put bodies against it. But it's sometimes a difficult proposition, because more and more content comes online. There's no technology that is absolutely fail-safe and foolproof, and there's certainly no human element that is absolutely fail-safe and foolproof. But as long as you can demonstrate they're making a good faith effort to respect the rights of owners, all of my conversations with the major parties have gone well because of that. We're trying to address the problem.
Who among you thinks that YouTube has not made a good faith effort to weed out copyright, and why do you think that?
Comment on whether they've made a good faith effort or not, but I could say that I guess that what others have argued is that they've been successful in filtering out adult content. So why can't you do that with copyright? Obviously copyrighted content. I think the second thing that rubbed a lot of content owners the wrong way, from what I've been hearing, is that it was sort of the proposition, and I don't know if this is true, but I don't believe any reason to believe it's not, that YouTube were asking first for a license and then to filter, right, instead of the other way around. And I think that did not sit well, not surprisingly, with content owners.
I'm reminded, it was Justice Potter Stewart that said that he knows pornography.
Yes,
when you see
it,
I find it hard to picture him saying, I know copyrighted material when I see it. I mean,
But
when people are
I mean, you
naked.
kind of know who Stephen Colbert might look like, or
Yeah.
Jon Stewart, right?
But there's, there's more obscure stuff too that I mentioned.
Well, there is, but you sort of there's probably a long tail distribution in terms of that this Jon Stewart stuff is probably more popular than the most obscure Viacom clip that's out there. Right?
And in addition, I mean, if something is suddenly, rapidly, there's an acceleration
Right.
to how much something is being watched, it's either very good or very naked. And,
Right.
at some
right.
point, you should just take a look at, there was just the,
So you could look at the top 100 videos if something.
Absolutely. I mean,
Yep.
and I have neither do I think, do many people have any visibility into the inner workings of YouTube. And from outward appearances, it's simply as, well, a lot of people could have done that. They just figured they wouldn't be able to pay the legal bills. And, I haven't seen anything that would lead me to believe that they had done anything other than, the classic line, it's easier to beg forgiveness than to ask permission.
And we'll find out what the law is, and we'll find out what Viacom's business strategy or intent was in filing the lawsuit. But I think also you can say, did you make a good faith effort after Pandora's box is opened and you've profited richly from it? But you enter into the business knowing that there are these copyright issues, saying, let's do it anyway, gain. And there may be some ramifications, and there was one of those with Viacom.
And by the way, last thing, I mean, Pandora's box is the perfect analogy. I mean, I often say to clients or potential clients, we sort of help you keep the bats away. But the fact of the matter is that you have to understand that if you are getting into the world of user-generated content, that you are giving up some control, to say the least, over what you are going to let into your community, what you are going to let onto your brand. And you have to understand what the instruments are and what the possibilities are, and then the benefits are that you are going to get a different sort of audience, or you're going to get different types of material, or more importantly, I think, a different relationship to your audience. You really begin to have a conversation with your audience as opposed to be simply a one-way broadcaster. But the fact of the matter is that there is a price for that, is that I don't really have to worry if I'm broadcasting Gunsmoke. I don't care whether you're watching it with clothes on or not. If I'm doing some sort of interactive activity that shows you watching Gunsmoke, I suddenly care what you're doing.
Let me ask another question on the law. My understanding is that the Supreme Court has held that if your business model is based on piracy, you can be held liable, whether or not you're directly encouraging a specific act of copyright infringement. Is it clear which side of the line YouTube is on? There's a lot of stuff on YouTube that is not copyrighted.
Yeah, I mean, I think the test you're referring to is, are there substantial non-infringing uses, right, for it? And, I think you can make a strong argument that there are, right? I think I haven't read the complaint, and so I'm not familiar with all the arguments that Viacom have made. It'll be interesting to see. And I mean, I think the other thing is, often this is just a part of a negotiation, right? It's just, clear. There were reports that they were legitimately trying to license, and it broke down, and so this is a sort of another step in that process, and maybe it never actually sees the light of day in a court.
In the words of one commentator that I heard on the radio this morning, if you can't beat them, join them, or buy them, you sue them. So,
Yeah,
maybe as simple as that.
as I said when we were chatting about this briefly downstairs, I mean, if you're going to call it a shakedown, it's a very legitimate shakedown. And what Viacom is also in the process of doing is having their own sites and letting people get access to their stuff. And I think what you will see in the next 3 to 6 months, to the level that even people who are in this business will be astounded, is the amount at which rights holders will be letting users take and manipulate their content. Rights holders that you would never have believed would let that happen, including the sports leagues and film companies and companies like Viacom. And in many ways, I think the elasticity of what they legally are allowing people to do with content is going to expand much beyond what people thought was possible. And in other ways, they just really want to constrict it. They want to say, okay, if this is happening, we want some control over that, possibly for profit, but also just control over that.
I think it's very interesting because, you know, the parallels with the record industry are a major issue, and you know, if the big studios start suing, then they're like the record industry. On the other hand, if they're letting all kinds of stuff out, you know, with moderate handcuffs or no handcuffs, then they're not like the record industry. They've learned a lesson. Do you think that the big studios have learned from the record industry?
I think they have. I mean, I've been in meetings where, you know, networks have actually said we've learned, you know, we've seen what happened to our brethren in the music industry. We know sort of how that movie might play out, as it were. But it's still a hard issue for them. I think they've also, you know, these are big companies with multi-billion-dollar businesses, with lots of stakeholders involved, both internally as well as externally. As one example, you know, you might be at a cable network and very interested in the new media department in getting your content out and distributed as widely as you can, but you might be handcuffed by the affiliate sales, you know, by the affiliate deals that have been done, by, you know, with the MSOs, with Comcast, et cetera. So there are encumbrances, even if your heart is in the right place.
I echo that. You know, we've been involved in similar conversations, and you know, big media has definitely, at least from my perspective, they've definitely figured out that there are new revenue models to be had by working with, you know, companies such as ours and try and figure out some sort of accommodation with the distribution of their content online. And if anything, other than, you know, putting a few more pennies in lawyers' pockets, one good thing that might come out of this lawsuit, either through negotiation or some, you know, sort of court-mediated resolution, will be, you know, a model for others to follow.
One of the bad effects from all the Napster litigation, and there weren't a lot of good effects for anybody, but one of the ill effects.
Well, you did. You had a hell of a book. So
Thanks. But one of them was that once they shut down Napster, the same stuff just migrated to sites where it was harder to shut down. You know, overseas, less centralized, and, you know, so legally and practically easier for the business to defend against the record labels. If Viacom succeeds, and, you know, say all the other studios join in, and YouTube is copyright free, doesn't everybody else just go to some site that's based in the Bahamas or wherever?
Because I think that I think a couple of things. I think that we're seeing the rights holders themselves open up their content. So you can go and watch NBC, as someone's talking, you know, we were talking about, George was downstairs. You can go on NBC's site and see many of their programs in their entirety online for free. And I think the other thing is that, to me, the conceptual shift is that while there may still be conflicts within single organizations, so this morning someone was talking about, you know, they've got one hand of an organization giving them material, and they've got another hand suing them for if they put that material on from the same company, right? But the big shift that I see is that, and a difficulty is that it's really hard to say, if you're NBC and putting this stuff out there for free, what's the ROI? Right? You can't quantify it, and they are used to living in a world where everything they could quantify by ratings and then what they charged advertisers, even though, as Lily Tomlin said about reality, it's just a collective hunch, even though the Nielsen's were basically, you know, a collective hunch to begin with. What I've seen happen in the last couple of months is the not insane, but a very cautious abandonment, because you guys are dealing much more with the networks on that level, an abandonment of the only if there's an ROI will we go ahead and do this sort of initiative, and understanding that there is something that may not be quantifiable in terms of the relationship that you have with your viewers through the fact that you're allowing your material to be shared and socially networked and be exposed, that has them doing things, and I think that just separates them dramatically from the business.
Yeah, they can finally measure it and track it.
Yeah, I'm surprised. It seems like there's more ROI. I mean, you can quantify it, some things, a lot more easily on the internet than you can.
Yes,
I mean,
you can.
You can sell an eyeball. You can sell a thousandth of an eyeball
Right.
on television, but you don't know if that's what drives the guy to the store or not. Whereas you do know if somebody clicks through, and if it's that sort of an ad.
But I think it's beyond that. I think, you know, last year and I think into this year we've seen a lot of experimentation, right? So business model. So, you have ABC doing Lost, and it's, they have a certain ad model, which is fairly unique to your typical ad model that you might see. You see all these companies that have experimented with these iTunes deals and to sell their programming on a one-off basis, a la carte. So others might be looking at subscription services, and so at least that's what we've been seeing, is that there's a fair amount of experimentation and willingness to try different models out. Also, I think that everybody, all these larger companies are doing, tend to have a relatively short horizon because, again, they're in the mode of experimentation right now.
The other thing to note when you compare just the whole Napster online music phenomenon with what at least with what is going on right now in video is that the user behavior is a lot different, right? With Napster and Kazaa, you were literally getting something for nothing. You were getting something tangible. You got an MP3 file which you could burn onto a CD. You could purpose it and use it on different devices. Thank you. Different devices. The behavior for online video, and particularly user-generated video, is a little bit different, right? There's a lot more snacking. There's a lot more people consuming minute and a half, 2 minute, 3 minute snippets of video, but most of them don't download it to watch over and over again in some physical form and take away from a DVD or a VHS sale. And I think because you have the user behavior being a little different and more aligned around snacking and consuming, that's why you see the major content owners being much more willing to repurpose their content, break it down into 3 minute segments, make it available online, because you can foster that distribution and measure that media that they couldn't do beforehand.
Well, also, I think it's again, it comes down to exposure, not just these two things, but it comes down to exposure, and it becomes to relationships, or how people relate to your product. So if on Kazaa or Napster, suddenly this piece of music is going out and everyone's sort of downloading it, that's one thing, and people have heard that tune already. But if I'm NBC and I've got a way for people to, to see The Office, and they don't have to be at their TV set at a certain time to sample it and get a piece of it, and I also find out that they are just relating to that show differently than if they were just sitting on a watching it, then I've got to, especially since I see my numbers dwindling overall, I've got to say there's something here I have to begin to experiment with, and I have to begin to find out then, okay, how I can monetize it, or if not monetize it, how I can use it in some other way to stem the tide of the fact that I'm losing viewers of the live experience. I mean, it's very interesting if you see that the shows most in demand are shows that are very high-end shows that like The Office, and which is a huge percentage of that show is watched on demand, whereas a bunch of stuff that people would just normally come across grazing, sort of middling TV shows, nobody's downloading them and watching them on demand.
Speaking of experimentation, let's leave the lawyers behind for a minute and talk about something else that was in the news this week. Michael Eisner saying that he's back in the content game, and he's going to be producing an 80-episode series called Prom Queen, 90 seconds apiece. And they teamed up with an outfit that had done this before, something called Sam Has 7 Friends. But this is very interesting to me because it seems like there's been this great divide of what's available on video, again from rank amateur to big media, a lot in between. This seems to be like a pretty hot topic these days. Is there going to be a lot of produced but not incredibly expensive content, and is that going to work, and how's it going to find the right people?
Yeah, I mean, we source all of our content for free. We sometimes help with actual field production, and we have freelancers in major cities. And I think that just as 25 years ago, those broadcast and movie studio companies that did not get into cable because they couldn't see applications for that medium and a new set of economics, and therefore got in very late, if at all, I think now as well, there will be entirely new ways to deliver content and various forms of economics behind it. So there's a lot of content out there that was not economic before because you couldn't deliver video effectively over the internet, and you had to build a certain kind of audience. That's what we're experiencing. So I think though that new set of media economics and technologies will enable experiences like that idea that wouldn't have made sense before.
I think it was mentioned earlier that one of the things I think young people really loved about the whole change of the way that music was distributed was the ability to buy a single or a couple of songs they really liked as opposed to buy an entire album. And so it's interesting that at this crossroads where there's a battle between content that was created expressly for television and then portions of that being brought, like was mentioned, short forms of it onto the internet, watched massively, and a battle over how that's going to be paid for and how that's going to be licensed. There's at the same time a really fascinating migration of the audience that the television producers have typically most sought after for their ads, migrating to internet and internet-enabled devices, almost to the extent that you could argue maybe a few years from now that a lot of television programming will originate coming from the internet back onto the TV screen instead of the other way around. So the timing of what Michael Eisner and people like him are now starting programming expressly for the internet generation and for internet delivery, I think is phenomenal. It's really well timed because there is quite a different experience on the internet from traditional media. And just going back to about 3 different things that have happened historically. Home video. I'm old enough to have been involved in the early days of home video. I worked for a guy called George Atkinson. He had 600 video station stores before there was a Blockbuster. There was a lawsuit very similar to the lawsuit today. It went all the way to the Supreme Court. It judgment called the right of first sale doctrine that basically ruled on the behalf of the video stores and the video chain stores and the VCR makers in Japan that it was okay to rent a movie in a store. The movie industry 100% opposed home video the way that it exists today. After they lost in the Supreme Court, they tried to control it, but they never were able to. It's the biggest source of revenue to the movie industry today, home video is, but they never really got ahead of the issue. Then we saw what happened with music industry never really got ahead of the issue. So now we're at that case with television programmers and content creators, and one of the biggest problems I think they're having is a lack of understanding of the internet itself. This whole social internet working experience and the way people interact, the content just was not originally created that way. So I think the future of the programming will be to sell it to all the different media and to create programming that's special for the internet. I think that's what Eisner is really, intuitive to be onto.
I think what we're seeing here is a very natural evolution. Right? When a new media starts getting traction, you'll have pre-existing media, content from there that's repurposed for it, right? It happened with radio, with respect to television, right? You just had these people that were just doing radio shows, but they were televising them instead of doing anything else, right? And then that evolved into real, content that was produced for that medium. I think we're starting to see the same thing here, where we're starting to have made-for-broadband content. If you look that professional sort of high quality, as we call it, high production value content might cost 5, 6, sometimes even 7 figures per episode, right? Whereas with the user generated content, it might have 1, 2, maybe 3 zeros after it to produce a single clip. And I think what we're going to start seeing is kind of these middle level made for broadband productions, which are maybe 4 zeros, 5 zeros in terms of cost, and provided that they can sort of get the ROI, if they can get an underwriter involved on board. I still think it'll be this year is very much an investment year for that, where it's hard, unless you're Michael Eisner, it's hard to convince an advertiser to fund you and underwrite an entire series without you having any track record, without you having any guaranteed distribution, et cetera, right? So a lot of folks are going to have to start investing ahead of the revenue.
Yeah, I mean, I've written about the fact that I just see content along this curve, and on one end, it used to be just a standard Gaussian curve. You had very, very low content, low-end content, home movies. It was down here, there was almost none of it, and then you had a lot of sort of junk in the middle, stuff that you just sort of drifted by the TV and saw, and then there was a very little stuff down at the end, which was, real high-end, well-produced stuff. The Sopranos, The West Wing, I mean, name a handful. Programs, and those were the shows that you only watched a little of because you had to run. I mean, people here probably remember, in the 80s and 90s, trying to leave the work to watch LA Law or ER or some show that you actually wanted to see. And you could only watch 1 or 2 of those series, at a time because you just couldn't accommodate in your schedule. Well, now in the on-demand world, that curve is just completely flipped the other way. And so there's now a lot of consumption of these high-end shows because TiVo them or just go down go to Netflix and get them sent to you by the whole series in order to see them. So now you can watch 3 or 4 different series, whereas before you can probably watch one. You don't watch a lot of the junk that you used to watch, and now you're nibbling at this low-end content. And so the curve sort of looks like this. And that end down here, a couple of interesting things happen. One is that it's just the equipment's cheaper. I mean, you can go get a broadcast quality high camera for, I don't know, $2,000 right now. And if you don't want to steal Final Cut Pro, you can pay $1,000 for it. And so you're in business. And then there are companies like ours, that allow you that you don't even have to edit the stuff. It's just easy to go and shoot. I won't bring it out because we all decided not to do demos, which I think is the right thing, but I have a camera that I carry around with me that shoots MPEG-4 video that is just better looking than, my camcorder of 2 years ago. And so my ability just to go someplace and shoot it and immediately post it on the web is huge. Is it worth anything? Well, we happen to think it's worth something to my friends and my relatives in a certain way. And if we can make it easy for people to share it, that's really cool. And then if you can make it easy for people to be guided to that. So I think we've gone from this world of gatekeepers, the big networks and the studios, to this world of guides. And I think that just changes, the sort of content you do, and that's why we're in the business that we're in.
Making the content is one thing. Distributing it and advertising against it or monetizing it are 2 separate matters entirely. And I think one of the biggest things that I've noticed just watching the rise of YouTube, and I'm sure it wasn't lost on the guys and girls at Viacom in New York, is more people are watching Viacom content on YouTube than they are on the Viacom .com websites. That fact was not lost on them. And what it says, and it goes back to user behavior, is that at least online in certain demographics, people are much more to watch content if they feel part of a community, whether it's on a social network or part of a larger YouTube community, than by going to destination television or must-see TV or appointment television, going to one network's website or one single source for it. And that, as we see the rise of this middle content or people creating content specifically for the net, it'll be interesting to see how they get that content out there and how they manage to, whether they advertising model or a for sale, by download model or what have you, how they mass a large enough audience to get advertisers interested or sell it directly to the public, if that's possible.
That leads to what will be my last question. Then I want to take some from the audience here. Who's going to be winning in a few years? Is it the big media companies?
Everybody.
Is it the aggregators? Is it small producers? Is it the advertisers? Do they figure out some way to make a killing at this?
I think consumer will win.
User wins.
Truly. I mean, the whether media companies and everybody else goes along or not, the consumer is in charge. I think that's a sea change that's happened the last 10 years and will continue to happen. I think that for smaller niche players, they'll probably need to ally themselves with networks and platforms that can get them scale. Be the name of the game. When you have so many different options.
I think some larger media companies will do well, but having done strategic planning sessions for large media companies for about 20 years in my cable television career, terrific ideas, everyone supports them, you go through a budgeting process, they get filtered out, and then you're protecting your legacy revenues. And I think the same thing will happen again. Who were the people who were successful 25 years ago when this wave of television change happened? Those who built great brands with new user experiences, giving people an opportunity to experience television around a certain genre or type of content in a new way. Those brands from Discovery on down are now billion-dollar brands, and the movie studios and broadcast networks and others that finally got in, generally much too late, paid a lot of money ultimately to try to acquire those companies.
Just progression from network, broadcast television to cable, and the plethora of channels and content and distribution opportunities that came there, and now going from cable to internet, you're going to see an X factor, a step function increase in content, and the ultimate winner, I think, will be all of us. It will be everyone that wants to either get their content online or look at various content online, and the audience might be even more hyper-fragmented, but because it's the internet, there are ways of aggregating that traffic and advertising against it as well. It's a good thing, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, but I think we all, myself included, sound very naive. I completely agree, though. And I think that, you know, what could really screw it is if, you know, something like net neutrality goes away. Then suddenly it doesn't matter how cheaply I can make something if, you know, it seems like a 6K experience unless I suddenly, you know, there's another gatekeeper in toll booth I have to go through. But I think that there just has been this dramatic shift from, and it's not just in television, it's just in communication in general, whether you're a broadcaster or any sort of a content producer, or you're selling cars. You just cannot have a one-way experience anymore. The consumer, I wouldn't say that they're in charge, but you just can't ignore them. You just can't shove it down their throat anymore.
I mean, I don't know. I think that to have winners, you need to have losers. So I think you're going to have some losers, you know.
Sure.
And you know, whether it's the MSOs because everybody bypasses them, maybe. You know, whether it's you know, production companies of a certain size who have certain, you know, very high cost structures in place, and you know, are losing the business from the broadcast and can't really adapt, perhaps. You know, and even some large media companies. I think the broadcast to cable migration is a great example, though. Just to not count out these large, you know, lumbering though they are media companies, you know, you still have broadcast. You know, the four major networks still command a huge portion of the ad revenues out there. I think it's still 50% or more, notwithstanding cable's inroads in terms of the audience. So, you know, these guys are smart and they're able to figure it out. And they've got a lot of resources, right?
Right.
Let's try and get at least a few questions in from the audience.
Good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, for the sake of discussion, we'll in the future with two possible choices. Viacom wins, gets $1 billion from YouTube, or Viacom loses, and YouTube gets a free pass. How does that affect, how do those paths differ as far as the future of this? What are the ramifications?
I think it's just a juggernaut. Some of the things mentioned before, the cost of the means of production, and the fact that storage and bandwidth are ultimately going down to virtually zero. Whatever happens in that lawsuit, there's going to be seismic shifts in the way that that media is consumed, and ultimately, I think companies like Viacom are looking at lawsuits as a way to extract certain business. And every company in Viacom's position is going to want to be a player in some form, whether it's creating their own YouTube competitors or not.
Look, the Napster lawsuit is relevant to this because, look, Napster lost. Did it change the way that music's distributed? Absolutely not. Did it have any impact whatsoever on the way young people interact with music now? Absolutely not. That's pre-iPods, which just took it to another level. So we're on an unchangeable path towards two, I think, changes in programming. Number one, universally accessible anytime, anywhere, and on any device. And number two, user interactive, not just posted by users, but interactive with users. And that's two phenomenal things that have happened in our lifetime and are really happening right now that will absolutely blow away whatever happens with this lawsuit.
You know, the other thing I'd add to that, and I hope you're allowed to not just moderate, but since you're an expert in the field, to toss in. I think that, you know, Napster did not have the financial ability to fight that over time, and I think time is a real factor here, because, you know, we just live in a time where, you know, the TV, I think it was 30 years that it took television to reach 50% penetration, and I know the computer took 15 years, right, from the personal computer from 1980 to 1995 to reach 50% penetration. The digital video recorder took, I think, 3. See what's happened with the iPod. So the fact is that Google has the resources for this thing not to be a quick game. It will be, even if they lose, it will get appealed. And I think that that brings in the time factor to this. And I just think that technology, both the rate of innovation and the rate of adoption are such that, you know, I'm not dodging the question. I just don't think that there is an answer that it's a binary answer of who wins or who loses, whereas 10 years ago in a different world you could give that answer because things just didn't move as quickly. But I think that, you know, if, let's put it this way, if Google owned Napster, would things have played out differently?
Well, I actually, it's, since you ask, Napster had chances, at least 3 chances to settle, and they could have made everyone involved extremely wealthy, and it was just sheer arrogance that they didn't. Andy Grove told Hank Barry, who was then heading Napster, to hold out because Napster was changing the world, and Hank bought it, and Hank asked for more money than he had before, and they should have settled. Everybody would have been happy, and they just held out. So if the flaw there was arrogance, I wouldn't say that Google's any more immune to that charge than many other folks. Yeah.
A follow-up question. How is this going to affect YouTube's practices going forward, and also the sites like YouTube that are also have the same problems? Are they going to start programming differently? Are we going to see retreat of any sort?
We were talking downstairs. I mean, it's you know, also, I don't think you can just say sites like YouTube. I mean, I think we're lumping together, you know, I think that there are so many different variations on this out there.
Specifically that
But
also accept
yeah, but that except, you know, right. I don't know. I mean, it's what happens in these situations is you are hamstrung legally in terms of what you do, because it's a classic case of no good deed goes unpunished, if you could call it a good deed, which is you begin to have a set in stone policy. All you've done is really hurt yourself because you put a line in the sand. So if YouTube says, okay, we now have this policy, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, and somebody then sues them, and they go into court, and the lawyer says, well, why did you just do X, Y, and Z? Why didn't you do the rest of the alphabet? They said, well, because we couldn't afford to do it. And then the lawyer's going, well, why should my client have to pay with the value of their company? Because you didn't want to spend an extra buck to do it. So, you know, I don't really know that, with the exception of having no policy, no official policy, how this is going to change, because I don't think these companies have an official policy. It's just what you were saying before. It's just, has the onus of the business been to profit off of rights violations, or has there been a business there and this is sort of a, you know, a byproduct of that?
Yep.
Question I have is, Joe also mentioned that consumers were consuming more of Viacom video on YouTube website. That in some ways shows that Viacom's online strategy was not successful. And some could argue that therefore you could say content is no longer king, it's the aggregation. The question I have for the panelists, what is the future of aggregation? What is the limit? Where is it headed?
Great question.
There's a great Bear Stearns report on the long tail that. Yeah, I mean, aggregation and brand, I think, were the two things that they talked about replacing content. So I'll just throw that out.
I mean, you know, it's also a supply and demand. I mean, there's a vastly more, you know, vastly greater supply of content and choices out there, and so, you know, the Viacoms of the world are having to compete with the, you know, production. You know, there's a bunch of 20-somethings in Brooklyn that are producing a show that are, you know, attracting a ton of eyeballs, ton of views, and you're competing with them now if you're Viacom, right? And so, yes, you know, I think there's more competition, and distribution, you know, will have, you know, and aggregation will have relatively greater power because of that.
Yeah, I guess make this the last question, I guess.
So, just building on the last question in terms of aggregation, you know, you could argue that it's not really aggregation, but much more what you build around aggregation that drives people and community aspects and stuff like that. But my question is actually related to the that's really tied to, you know, end users and what they perceive to be cool. How defendable are any, you know, competitive advantages you built in that space? Can your, you know, online community you're building be very cool today and not so cool tomorrow? And how can you make sure you build some more sustainable competitive advantages in your business?
Well, the barriers to entry are lower, and the barriers for entry for your competitors are lower as well. Therefore, it has to do with developing great content or aggregating great content and building a brand with which you build a loyal community of people who come to you and who are loyal to that brand. So you'll have a much more competitive environment and a much longer tail with a lot of people aggregating it in various forms. But it's a wilder world with a lot more ability to compete because anyone can produce content.
Yeah, I think it just, you know, as I was saying before, in terms of the rate of adoption and rate of development, I mean, it's exactly what puts the onus on just the app. I mean, all of us in our companies, you know, we are just constantly working to continue to innovate. And, you know, we could think that we had reached as large as we could get as a company, any of us, and I'm sure that we would still, given our backgrounds and what we know of what's going on, have to innovate. I think that's part of it, but I also think part of it is just the relationship to content. I think that it's very much about that. A lot of this is about status, and it's about what you allow, and part of what we do and how we innovate is what we allow people to do with that content, how we allow them to share that content. It's not just personalizing content by I'm going to do a mashup. It's just the fact that I'm able to go and select this portion of this and give it to you is sort of put my little stamp on that if we have a personal relationship. And so I think that's a big part of it going forward too.
I think if I knew what it took to build a competitive advantage, no offense, I wouldn't share it with anybody here. But you know, seriously, I mean, you look at Friendster and MySpace, and that's the classic case study of, you know, how do you kind of lose your mojo? And, you know, I think at the end of the day, you have to have this laser focus on keeping your users happy and don't get lame. Otherwise, your users will go elsewhere. And, you know, I think, you know, Friendster learned that lesson, and MySpace is, you know, probably, you know, sort of struggling with that, you know, because now they're a part of a big corporation, you know.
Okay, thanks very much.
Well done. Having worked at Friendster for 2 years and being part of the team, I could respond to that.
Oh, that's right.